Lesson 5.3 on page 203 is about writing fractions and decimals as percents. Our essential question, how can you write fractions and decimals as percents? All right. During the 2008-2009 season of the National Basketball Association, or NBA, the Phoenix Suns won about 11 out of 20 of their games. The Miami Heat won 524 thousandths of their games. Which team was more successful during the season? Underline the sentence that tells you what you're trying to find. Well, we're trying to find which team was more successful during the season. Circle the numbers you need to use. Okay, those are the numbers we're going to be using. To compare the season performances of the Suns and the Heat, it is helpful to write the fraction and the decimal as a percent. Write the fraction or decimal as a percent. So we're starting with a fraction, obviously. We're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator. The numerator and denominator by the same value to write an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. Remember, this is our magic number. So we want 100, when we're done, we want 100 in the denominator. All right. So what times 20 is going to get me to 100? So we really are focused on the denominator because we want 100 there. So 5 times 20 will give me 100. I have to multiply the numerator by the same number so that it stays a form of 1 and we have an equivalent fraction. So 11 times 55, or 5 is 55, sorry. A percent is a ratio comparing a number to 100. A percent is a ratio comparing a number to 100. Write the ratio, as a percent. So 55 over 100 is the same as 55%. So the percent of games won by the Phoenix Suns is 55%. Now let's find out the percent of games won by the Miami Heat. To write a percent as a decimal, to write a percent as a decimal, divide by 100. To write a decimal as a percent, which is what we're going to be doing, we multiply by 100. To multiply by 100, move the decimal point 2 places to the right, as they did here. So 524 thousandths times 100. We move that decimal 2 places to the right. It ends up between the 2 and the 4. So 524 thousandths is the same as 52 4/10%. So the Miami Heat, so the percent of games won by the Miami Heat is 52.4%. Because they won a greater percentage. So who won the greater percentage? The Suns or the Heat? Well, the Suns did. 55 is greater than 52. So the Suns were more successful during the 2008-2009 season. All right, page 204. You can use what you know about fractions, decimals, and percents to write numbers in different forms. So we're going to write 7/10 as a fraction and as a percent. So this number right here means 7/10. We know this from our place value at the beginning of the year, 7/10. So we write 7/10 as a fraction, which is 7/10. So 7/10 equals 7/10. To write as a percent, first write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of, what's our magic number in chapter 5? 100. So we want 100 in our denominator again. So we're going to look at this 10 and figure out how we can get it to 100. We would do that by multiplying by 10. Whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top as well, and vice versa. So we end up with 70/100ths. So the ratio is 70 to 100 as a percent. We write that as a percent, 70%. So 7/10 written as a fraction is 7/10. And 7/10 written as a percent is 70%. All right, write 3/40 as a decimal and as a percent. Okay, since 40 is not a factor of 100, it is more difficult to find an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. I can't just multiply this times 2 or times 10 and get 100 in my denominator. So instead, I'm going to use division to write it as a decimal first. All right, and we always, with decimal or with fractions, we always divide up. So the denominator becomes the divisor. The numerator becomes the dividend, always. All right, so 40 goes into 3 0 times. Can't be done. Bring up that decimal. 40 goes into 30 0 times. Can't be done. So here we have 0. Bring down the 30. So now we're down to this 300. 40 can go into 300 7 times because that's 280. Then we go ahead and subtract 0, take away 0, 0. 30, take away 28 is 2. Bring down another 0. 40 goes into 200 5 times. Get that 5 right over that 0, which is 200, remainder of 0. All right, so now we have a decimal. So 3/40 is equal to 0 and 75 thousandths. All right, so to write a decimal as a percent, you multiply by 100. We did that on the previous page. We multiplied by 100. So we know this, 3/40 equals 0 and 75 thousandths. We're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. 1, 2, and put it right there between the 7 and the 5. So that equals 7 and 5/10%. So 3/40 written as a decimal is 0 and 75 thousandths. And 3/40 written as a percent is 7.5%. All right, let's take a look at our notes. All right, so writing fractions as decimals and percents. 100 is our magic number through the whole chapter. Notes, fraction to percent. We need 100 in the denominator. Here are some examples where we took a denominator, multiplied it by a factor that would take us up to 100, and then we can write it as a percent. As a decimal to a percent, we multiply by 100 and move the decimal 2 spaces to the right, and we have several examples of that as well. All right, get these notes in your notebook.